So, hello everybody, we will get started. My name's Paul Harris and I'm the Director of the MBA program at the Deakin Business School. And I want to start our event by acknowledging and thanking the Wurundjeri elders and people, past and present, for their ongoing care and stewardship of this beautiful land where we're having our event tonight. I'm a descendant of the Gunditjmara people up near Lightning Ridge in kind of northern New South Wales, along with Scottish, English and Scandinavian heritage, bit of a mix. And I was raised in Gunditjmara country and now live near the Mary Creek. Tonight we continue the First Nations tradition of storytelling and listening. You might call it yarning. It's a way to share knowledge and build relationships, and that's the whole point of these big things. It's not about us necessarily telling you stuff, it's about sharing. Although with this yarning concept, Mark will know what I'm talking about, we won't be able to throw away the Western concept of time because the staff need to be out of here by 7 p.m. So just keep that in mind. But in the spirit of that tradition, we go into this event with a sense of curiosity to understand our world and each other a little bit better, with the goal of building stronger and more respectful relationships that can bring health back to our country. Working together is the way forward. So why are we doing this particular topic? Some of you may have been at the last Big Think where we looked at complexity. I thought this was a really interesting and useful next step in the big things. And earlier this year, I had two colleagues from Università Cattolica in Milan visit Australia to conduct research with me on governance in non-profits, cultural organisation and NGOs. And we were initially interested in seeing how diversity influences sustainability. But as we kind of explored these concepts a little bit more, we broadened and maybe shifted our thinking about both diversity and sustainability. What we realised is that so many studies see diversity through essentially a few easily measured lenses, usually gender, age and ethnicity. And while these are really critical to diversity, we wondered if diversity was more complex than those easily measured metrics, especially in organisations that have a purpose beyond financial performance. So we started to wonder whether cultural and social capital might be a more appropriate way to examine diversity in these types of organisations. Just for background, cultural capital refers to an individual's knowledge, their expertise, their background, their experience, their reputation and power, whereas social capital refers to their personal connections. We also moved away from sustainability being purely a financial goal. Often when organisations talk about sustainability, they instantly go to financial sustainability. And we discovered that in many of our conversations. And interestingly, our two guests didn't go there. And I thought that was why it was really interesting to kind of have this conversation. I actually think sustainability is much more than that. We're actually interested in exploring the concept of social sustainability, the idea that organisations have a responsibility to undertake their practice in the context of the communities that they serve. And we're actually examining this argument that when not-for-profits, NGOs and even corporate entities focus too much on financial outcomes, they risk deviating from their social and cultural obligations. All organisations, corporate and otherwise, exist as part of a social and cultural structure, and that gives them the capacity to exist. So on our journey, Marta, Georgia and I interviewed many diverse individuals, including our guests tonight. After the interviews, we all said that the parallels between what Mark and Rachel discussed followed a similar contour, and that we needed to get these two in a room to talk about their experiences and how it's influenced their lives, the way they work and how they interact with their communities. So I asked them if they were available, that was the first thing, and if they would be willing to be part of tonight's Big Think. And they said yes, which is good because you can see they're here. Here you are. So I'll just introduce you. Professor Mark Rose, a Gunditjmara Elder and Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Innovation here at Deakin University, has dedicated his career to empowering First Nations Australians through education and advocating for the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and knowledge within academic institutions. Mark is a champion for education for First Nations people, and we'll get to talk about that some more soon. Joining Mark is Rachel. Now, I've never actually learned how to pronounce. Is it Chrapot?
Chrapot.
Chrapot. There you go. Rachel Chrapot, a seasoned lawyer, educator and advocate with extensive experience in the legal sector, higher education, arts and culture and governance. She's also a recent graduate of the Deakin MBA.
Okay.
Rachel has a passion for integrating purpose and profit and is a prominent figure in promoting sustainable and impactful leadership practices. Like all of our MBA Big Thinks and the Deakin MBA program itself, our goal is to understand a complex topic more deeply. If at the end we come out with some answers, that's great. But if anything, I'd hope we leave with more questions and a willingness to engage with these ideas some more. So I'm going to join you in a second, but I'm going to start with a question. I'll start with a really easy one, Mark, for you.
Sure.
In what ways do historical legacies shape your leadership philosophy?
Well, historical legacies shape my whole life and being. Paul, you mentioned that I'm of Indigenous heritage, and of course, I want to recognise country also and bring the respect of my ancestors and the compliments of my elders here to this gathering. I've just flown in from Auckland, and I just want to talk about getting here before I answer that question. That
Of course.
Took off from Aotearoa at 6 a.m. this morning, their time this morning, tracked across the ditch, then tracked along Gunai land, and then we diverted around the Kulin Nations, went to the outer marker, which is Mount William, and came across over Tanarong into Wurundjeri land. So it was great to be able to describe that in Aboriginal terms. So I am an Aboriginal person. People say I'm an Aboriginal academic. So there are academics who happen to be Aboriginal, and there's ones that bring their whole self to the act of what we do. And Paul, you're very much bring your whole self to this act of teaching. Teaching is our core business. If you read not Henry Reynolds, Blaney's book, Triumph of the Nomads, they talk about the average Aboriginal male only had to work 4 hours a day to economically sustain themselves. And that's from a Western perspective. The rest of the time was spent in sharing knowledge and paying a high tax that I pay in my salary and working 60-hour weeks. Thanks for colonising it. I don't think things are that much better. So I yearn for the old days, but the history
too, mate.
Yeah. History, to answer your question, my dad was a stolen kid and I was born stateless. I was born in 1954. Like sometimes I lie about my age. I've got to be careful. This is not a dating site, is it? So I was born in 1954, born stateless, and my mixed marriage. My mum was non-Indigenous, dad Indigenous, and the famous Rose family. And before too long, he was a stolen kid. History or the path of the ancestors deemed that he was shadowed into the marriage, my mum and dad's marriage, by demons. And those demons were domestic violence. I was about to be put in a home. My non-Indigenous family said, no, that's not going to happen. So as proud Presbyterians, they struck a deal with the Catholic Bishop of Ballarat. Talk about ecumenism. And I was given to nuns to be raised in the convents in Ballarat. So where my cousins got no education, they only could have a primary school education, I was given one. And if you look at my life, I've been able to give back heaps. The nuns bashed into me, to those who were given more is expected. And so that's where history comes from. And I got a good education, went to good schools, got expelled from average schools, but I went to good schools. And it just to prove that education and intelligence is not about eugenics. It's about, being a choice and making a decision. So history took me, I always say my history, my HR department is not people and culture here, but it's the ancestors. I end up in places where they put me. And I've been put in some spectacular places to do things that have been really important to me and the community. So history, being able to challenge what history would have deemed for me through education. It's a long way.
It's a long way to answer.
I'm going to take a rest now.
Take a break. What about you, Rachel? What's, in terms of your kind of historical legacies, how, again, in those conversations that we had with you, it took a bit of time for you to actually start kind of saying, well, yeah, you know, that there is a huge kind of historical context in which you come to your role. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
In context of where I'm coming from, I'm the first of my family born in Australia. So my parents came to Australia as refugees after World War II. My late grandfather was in a Nazi concentration camp, and so they came as stateless people and as refugees to Australia. And my parents are the first, although not born in Australia, came here at a very young age, at the age of 2 and 3. And were educated in Australia, and education actually was one of the key things that was really important to both sides of my family, because they saw through education the ability to contribute back to the community that you were in. It was always very important. And I think Jewish communities, particularly throughout the world, wherever Jews have settled, they have embraced the culture, but uniquely keeping their own culture, I think, but contributed back to the communities in which they have migrated to or have lived in. And I think that was always very important and instilled in me through my grandparents, through my parents, about giving back to, one, a country that had opened their arms to us and let us live here freely, but that it was important for us to teach our kids, and that through education and the privileged positions we were in to get education, that our role was to pass that on to future generations. And I think that's always impacted me in all the roles I've taken. I've taken lots of different roles. You know, I've been a barrister in commercial law. I was a judge's associate. I was, what else have I done? I taught and still teach it in law faculties throughout Victoria. But at all times, I've had this mentorship that I think has, which is effectively teaching, isn't it? Just not always in a formal sense, but and what you talk about, the formality of your 4 hours of work, but then it's the informal education where I think you can teach more than anything. I've always seen myself as being, someone gave it to me, it's my role to pass on what I know to other people. And I think that's really, really important. And that's always been a thread throughout my family and community. It's about giving back and then sharing my knowledge.
Mark, you've talked a lot about, you and I have talked about the concept of the ancestral mandate. It does sound like that. Can you, first of all, give us a sense of what your definition of your ancestral mandate is? And you know, I use that term because I think it sums it up beautifully. But you...
Oh, thanks, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've just spent a week in Uluru with 40 dynamic Aboriginal executives, the first warriors in the boardroom who made it to executive class in big companies. And I've had the privilege of working them for the last 8 years. And I talk to them and say, you're working in the West and it's, you know, you got the title and the trappings, but don't be seduced. Think about your mandate. You're there for a reason, and the reason you've got to get in touch with your ancestors to work out why. In my case, my mandate is very simple. I got to get as many kids through university and into a good profession. I believe that I talk about sovereignty, and I want to return Aboriginal people to a sovereign position in this country, not the Lydia Thorpe notion of sovereignty. That's a bit different. But a point where, and I work with and admire your mob because your group invested in each other's success. The Chinese call that guanxi.
It's the same concept.
And it's very much the same concept. So my ancestral mandate has led me through education. When I walked on Framlingham and Uncle Banjo took me to sacred places to show he said, "You come to this place with an education," because I grew up to the community. He said, "You're here to teach us the white man's way, but not to make us powerful, strong, to walk in both worlds." So walking in two worlds is a central thesis.
And I think that's actually a central theme, isn't it? The ability to walk in two worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The ability to take the culture that you've grown up with, that you live with, and that's your makeup and your influences, but to walk in the world that we live in. And that means also coming into contact with lots of other people's worlds, if that makes, and be able to walk in their shoes. And to live together.
Do you feel that there's conflict
important
as well? Because I think that whenever we ask people to see the world through a particular lens, they go, well, I want to see I want to live an authentic life, but also I'm pushing up against something that prevents me from achieving that. Is that?
My Uncle Banjo had 4 days of education in his life. He went to school and saw a teacher down there at Framingham, hit a kid and he said, "This can't be a good place. This education can't be good." And he left and got education from the elders in the community. And I'm writing a book chapter for Kay Price at the moment, a book on an Aboriginal education. And my thesis around education being a liberator or a captivator. And if I take my knowledge and give it to blackfellas in a particular way, am I fulfilling the work of the colonisers, or am I using it them to make them powerful? I've never marked an undergraduate paper in my life as an academic that hasn't quoted Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I hear it one more time, I'll scream. And Maslow said, if the hammer is the only tool you have in your toolkit, you'll see the world as if it's a nail. And the moment we walk into the industrial classroom, we're taught about binary positions, left or right, good or bad, like that. And the truth lies somewhere between Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. Can I tell a story about Uncle Brian Butler? He's a great fella. He getting on now. He a Central Desert man. He was stolen. It's a stolen gem, taken to Darwin and put in an orphanage just a couple of weeks before the Japanese bombed Darwin. And the bombs fell down and he was sent back to his family. He says, "Thank God for the Japanese." Now, if you're a standard Australian historian, the story of Darwin being bombed is a disgraceful one about, attack by, expansionist nation on a peaceful, loving country. But if you're Brian Butler, you're caught between two colonial expansionist things. So Indigenous knowledge, it's not learning one thing, it's learning to walk between two worlds and finding new knowledge. And that's what these places, I don't mean the corporate centre, but universities in general and programs like MBAs are all about finding new knowledge.
And perspective. Because so one of the things, the story that you tell is that from his perspective, he sees that this is a great thing.
Yeah.
From the perspective of other people living in Darwin or in Australia worldwide, their perspective was very different. And I think what's important is for us to be able to see everybody's perspective.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to be able to take that perspective and say, look, I might disagree with it. That you don't have to agree with everybody's perspective. That's not what we're about. But you have to see it. And I think once you can see it, then you can open up your mind to expand.
Absolutely.
The thoughts that you've got.
And Brian wasn't right, and the standard version is not right. The truth is in the middle, and if we can get people to be that neurologically nimble and agile, how much better would our organisations run? How much better would our, Sky TV wouldn't exist?
I mean, to go to that point, how then do you change an episteme in existence right now to say it's okay to work in the grey? Oh, I'm a poet and I didn't even realise I was.
And I think we've had this we've had this conversation a few times, but also we had it more broadly within our MBA. A lot of people are uncomfortable in that grey. So they need, it's about and I can't say that I'm necessarily comfortable in it all the time either. But don't get me wrong, it's easy for me to sit here and say, yes, we should all be comfortable with being uncomfortable and we should all be comfortable being in that state where we're not sure what we're, but I think every now and again what you have to do is put yourself out into that uncomfortable position, because then you can say, right, I'm going to take that part of that and take that back to my comfortable position. And I think as long as you can, and look, people who don't want to have conversations with you are never going to have conversations with you, okay? Sometimes you can't convince everyone even to come to the table. But if you've already got people who are in this room or who are watching online who are prepared to have the conversations, then it's about bringing your bit to the table and listening to what those people are saying and taking away one part of it and adopting it or evolving it into your thought processes. What do they say when you go to a conference or something, if you come out with one useful bit of information or one thing that you're going to take with you, I think all our conversations need to be about, I'm not here to convince you of anything that is right or wrong. What I'm here is to listen to what you've got to say. You listen to what I've got to say and take one thing away from what I've said and move that into a part of your life. And I think that's the grey. I think that's important.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I love what you're saying, Rach.
No, you keep going. I can just keep talking, so you should interrupt.
From my worldview, and I run a program here called Graduate Learning Outcome Number 8, and it's getting Indigenous perspectives in every subject matter across the curriculum. And the national curriculum, I chaired that, I'm meeting with them tomorrow. I chaired that for a decade and got a whole lot of Aboriginal stuff. But educators come and say, what do we teach? It's not what you teach, it's the way you teach it. In the industrial classroom, it's a very transactional. You ask a question, you get it, and wonder why things are so binary, right or you're wrong. But in Aboriginal knowledge transfer, it is all about relationship. So you create a relationship with someone and then you let it wash over. You walk around and it'll come. I've just taken those 40 kids on country at Mudurjulu, between a rock and a hard place, the resort one. That's the community, they say they're the dark side of the rock, so of the moon. But we deliver tough intellectual concepts and let's go in country and let it wash over us, and it's brilliant what people come. But we're trained from the day that we walk into a classroom that and the teacher tells you colour within the lines,
One of the things I think I always wanted to teach law students, that I still teach law students, is it's not just black and white. They want to know, well, what's the answer? How do I answer the exam question? How do I answer the legal problem? And I'm just like, you're dealing with human beings. There's a lot of grey. It's not just black and white. And I think that's what's really important, even though the law seems to be that it's always,
But it isn't. I think that's the thing that people don't realise about the law, is that it's probably as grey as you get, because it just depends on the day. And, I do want to kind of pursue this idea of different forms of knowledge. And I'll come to you first, Rachel. But, I mean, what do you think are the benefits of people grappling with something other than the current way we think about things? And how do you even do that without it being tokenistic?
It's a good question. How to do it without being tokenistic is really a challenge. I think that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's about sometimes having small conversations with lots of people as well. And sometimes, in my view, sometimes conversations I don't realise the impact that they're going to have, that they have an impact, You have conversations that seem casual conversations. They're not formal, they're not being recorded, they're not sitting in a panel. They're informal conversations. I think that's a way to move forward in thought as well. Like I feel like the conversations I've had with people and then gone away and thought about and then taken that to the next level, even if I've never go back and have a conversation with that person ever again. I think that's really important.
Is it a time question as well? Is that being patient?
Yeah, and we all are impatient mostly. It's like we never have time, do we? Is it a time thing? Is it about I think it's about mulling, sitting with
space.
Giving yourself space to sit with ideas as well. And I think that, and sometimes that's seen, I think, as quite a negative thing. It's like, keep moving. What's the answer? Finish the assignment, do the question, do the presentation. My boss wants this, let's, move. Whereas I think sometimes there's, and I found this even throughout various roles that I've had, sometimes not answering quickly and sitting back and letting it digest.
Marinate.
Marinate, that's a good word. I was trying to think of what's a really good word. Marinate allows both sides to think back about what their position might be, and then there's often a better outcome. I mean, that's I think we are too quick to solution outcome.
Talk to us about time, Mark.
Yeah.
Time in the kind of Western kind of perspective, but then also in...
I'm going to be a bit controversial, and I've been criticised by people for telling a story. So if I upset anyone, my name's Warren Mundine, and Sky TV.
Blame someone else.
Ray Martin.
There you go.
When the Americans rolled into Afghanistan, and CNN went up to a Taliban elder and said, "What do you think about the Americans being here, invading the country?" And this old Taliban, not that I should be quoting Taliban, but I'm going to be on Sky before I know it.
Yes.
But the Taliban elder said, "The Americans have got the watches, but we've got the time." And, the moment we walk into that primary classroom, we are taught, your profession, every minute's got to be accounted for accountants.
6-minute intervals. That's why I got out of it.
I'm glad they don't apply it to academics.
No.
So we'd be in deep trouble. But,
Or we'd be really rich.
Oh, yeah.
We take so long. Ask us a question, it lasts 3 hours.
The thing about letting things wash over you and letting not only your intellect speak to you, but also your spirit. So taking those 40 young people to Uluru, I said, I want your spirit to be disturbed here. I want you to be unsettled and to let the country, the trees, the desert, and the people talk through you. So, that thing about time is it's a construct. After the stroke, I don't have a watch anymore. But time is such a Western measurable. It's important because I want to get a train to get home tonight, so I'll be worried if it's not on time. But when we transfer knowledge and relationship is not time-bound, and we talk about black time, Paul, when people turn up.
Talk about the development of relationships. I think that is essential.
Yeah.
It's relationship building over time. And one of my students said this to me the other day, you know so many people, you have so many relationships. And I said, well, that's happened over time. You're 19. You don't have the same relationships or the broadness of relationships that I might have in my 50s or something. So it's the build, and that takes time. And patience.
I think too it brings us to this idea of social and cultural capital. It's the relationships you have give you access to power in a way.
Sure.
And I guess the question that I've always grappled with is, and we're kind of working around that a little bit, is so I come from a family that had no money and those kinds of things. Now I'm an academic. I have access to power. I have access to knowledge. Does that then change the nature of what I bring to governance, to leadership? Because now I've been corrupted by it. Can I be an authentic representative of my community anymore? And I think this is not an easy question to answer, but I think about, I'm on boards and things like that, and I go, but what am I representing?
But sometimes it's just about taking yourself back to where you were, I suppose. Just because a person's moved to a different stage in their life, career, different space, that doesn't mean all the things that happened before to them don't impact where they are now, so that they can't be in a space having forgotten where they were. I understand what you're saying. Is sort of what am I influenced by?
Or not me
or who do I?
personally, but
not person, but as a person, who do we represent?
Yeah. What is this concept of an authentic? Bringing your authentic identity.
Self.
I mean, Mark, you would be grappling with this. You're one of the first Aboriginal people with a PhD in Australia. Those kinds of things. That suddenly you have both social and cultural capital, and yet you are still very much in your approach. You are still very connected to community.
And any capital I have comes from being Aboriginal and being community. It's something that I love and, I adore. But so that very thing we challenged the group last week at Uluru, said, you guys are now on Main Street, but a lot of your relatives are still on Struggle Street. And we've got to make sure that we don't forget that wherever I go, anywhere, I go and meet with the community. And as you're talking, before coming here, I just got invited to meet a couple of ministers in Canberra, which kind of goes to where I am now.
Yeah.
But when I think about Ngunnawal people in Canberra, I think about this old woman, Auntie Agnes, a beautiful woman, short, I wouldn't get in the blue with her, but what she when she does a welcome to the country, she gets everyone, let's not do the normal one. Let's go outside and take our shoes off and feel Mother Earth. And my ancestors said me reminders of who I am. My community will remind me of who I am. But one of the things I worried about when I got my PhD, I was in a business faculty teaching MBAs where we all had to get our PhDs to keep our jobs. So I watched the reaction when people get a PhD, they got the screwdriver out and they put in the nameplate. They got the business card printed already. Yeah. One particular person, their voice dropped and went slower. This is Dr. Paul.
Oh, they're serious.
Oh, yeah. And another one, answering machine went to third person.
Oh,
wow.
Dr. Sue is not in her office at the moment, but I always said I would never use my title in community. And when I got to community, they used it on my behalf. And they still to this day, they are so proud of me that it makes me emotional. And, I just been elevated to the distinguished professor here. But when the VC rang and told me, I said, that's really nice. But there's one title I carry close to my heart, that's uncle. When young Aboriginal kids, on the streets, and I co-chaired the Royal Commission into Deaths in Custody, so I've been in and out of every jail in the state. When I walk around and those people know that I've taught MBAs all through Asia. I worked internationally, got 5 qualifications, but I'm still Mark, Gunditjmara fella, and, a deadly sort of person. So I'm true to my cultural being, and you give me half a dozen more titles. No, let's talk about the pay that goes with it. But
collecting them.
But how do you keep connected to? How do you keep your feet on earth?
How do you think? And I think communities do that for you. Don't you think your community does that for you?
They do.
It's like your family does that.
So what happens in your community when you step out? Do they? Well, at Kadima, for example, you were talking about how you were grappling with multiple, both stakeholders but expectations of the organisation. Can you talk to us a little bit? And older people who say, no, this is how we do it, and then younger people
saying I want to branch out from that. Or that younger people often don't, I wouldn't say younger, but different generations of people don't understand where the organisation started, and then the people who start the organisation don't want to let go of what the organisation is in order for it to evolve. I'll tell you a bit about what that organisation was, perhaps, because otherwise, or is, I should say. So Kadima, which I've recently moved on from that role at the end of June, but I was the CEO of a Jewish arts cultural organisation based in Elsternwick. It's 114 years old. It's been established in Melbourne many years ago. It promotes Jewish culture and through the arts, but based in the Yiddish language. And Yiddish was a language that my grandparents spoke. I understood and still understand, but don't speak fluently. So it's already almost lost on after one generation. So my parents spoke Yiddish, and Yiddish is a language that comes from Eastern Europe. Depending where Jews settled, the language has evolved over time. It's a mixture of Hebrew, German, Hebrew, Polish, Hebrew, Ladino. Like it's a very much and since the Jewish community in places like New York have expanded, and with people like Seinfeld who have brought the language of Yiddish culture and language has sort of come to mainstream, because I say it's more mainstream. And there are still people within the Gunditjmara organisation who are now in their 80s, I would say, who are like, why don't we still have the lunch club? Why don't old people, like they used to do luncheons for people of a certain generation. Now, people in their 20s aren't coming to sit and have lunch together, right? I said, well, nobody will come to those. Like we need to, the organisation has to evolve. Mm-hmm. And then they say, you can't leave this part of it behind. I'm like, no, we're not leaving it behind. We're changing it. We'll do something else, So the struggle within small organisations when it comes to communities and culture is that you have the community that wants to preserve itself for obvious reasons. I mean, they want to keep the community real and alive, and they don't want to lose things. But how do you keep an organisation around for X amount of times and make it relevant to the community as those people get, and I don't love using that term, assimilated into the community, but evolved into the community or working together within the community? How do you keep that organisation alive? And it's a huge, I had daily arguments, more than one a day, wow, of various people approaching me from the community saying, oh, you can't do that. That's the way we've always done it. God, I've always hated that term. We've always done it this way, so we'll keep doing it. It's a nightmare. But it keeps you sort of grounded by people who have been around for a while. Mm.
Why are you pointing at Mark?
No, I wasn't pointing at Mark. No, but in terms of that, I mean in terms of the elders of the community. Yeah. You have elders of the Indigenous community, and we have elders of the Jewish community. Yeah. I mean, they might not want to be seen like that anymore. Yeah. And those people bring with them a history and culture that needs to be listened to. But the challenge, I think, for people of my generation is to turn around and say, well, I want to keep that, but how do I make it relevant for the next generation so we don't lose that? Mm. And that is the pulling and the pushing that happens, and it can be exhausting. I don't know about you, but it's exhausting, that constant pulling and pushing.
I wanted to get back to this idea of social sustainability because that's part of what we're talking in both of your discussions with us with our research. Kind of, we asked you to define social sustainability. I'll come to you first, Mark.
What did we say?
Yeah, exactly.
I can't remember what I defined.
But Mark, you said you define social sustainability as something where we promote diversity of perspectives and the creation of an inclusive environment where authority is decentralised. I kind of want to ask you if you can expand on that, and you kind of put it in the context of yarning a little bit as well, but help us understand how you apply that in a corporate role, like the role that you have at Deakin. So how do you, I guess in a way, slow down time and get people who are in high-level things wanting to, meet targets and stuff like that, to slow down, and also then to say there is a decentralisation of authority as well. Like universities of all places is probably the most hierarchical.
I've got two very good examples.
Fantastic.
This is something I prepared earlier. No, two very good examples. At the moment, part of the Indigenous strategy here is to say that Aboriginal people aren't responsible for the Aboriginal outcomes in this universe. It's everyone's business. So we devolved the strategy, rather my office leading everything back to the faculties in the form of compacts, and across a couple of domains, the faculties are now reviewing what they do, and they're creating a compact with my office, and therefore and my office also relates to my community position. I'm elected by 33 communities across Victoria, and that's one of the roles I hold. And so in the compact, it asks for symbolism inside, how to get Aboriginal symbols in the faculty. So, we're looking at dual names. We're looking at the health faculty to heal in an Aboriginal language. The business faculty we're having a bit of struggle with. It's probably to do lunch. I don't know. That might be marketing. I don't know. Anyway, what I got the other day was 2 young Aboriginal women from New South Wales to come to the executive of the science faculty CV, and they did the whole executive spent half a day basket weaving. Now, they go home to their loved ones and say, I was
basket weaving today.
And they did it, and they got there, and then they created a painting and drew out the values of their faculty, and it went into a painting and words that will be contained in a message stick. They'll sit on the dean's desk, and an electronic message stick on their Zoom meetings. So this is great stuff. But they said by sitting down just yarning and talking, and all the busyness went away, and they got so much more, or did so much more work. The other one was the Vice Chancellor, Ian, has got an Indigenous Advisory Council, which it's leading Aboriginal people from across government, business, and education come and meet with him. Because of sorry business, a whole lot of people couldn't make it, but we decided to have, rather than have the agenda meeting, we just had a yarn. And he said it was the best meeting out, that we covered winds of things more deeply. Rather than a linear thing, we all blackfellas go around in circles and come back. And at the end of the day, we clear what was on the agenda, but in more greater depth and greater understanding. That's 2 ways about sustainability that I think made that really nice. And that's evolving. But if you look at the organisation, it's still a military structure. And
as most organisations are.
Yeah, they are. The vestige, the language we use, the structure, it's the industrial classroom with a military tone in it. And if you look at theory up until the 50s, it's very mechanical. Then it went into human, and, the Travis Stock papers. And then I would argue that if you really interrogate the theory, it's returning the organisation back to a tribal structure. Bowman and Deal in their book, Reframing Organisation, do a great chapter on it. But see your organisation as a tribe and value the relationship, and you see how much better outcomes will come from it.
It's interesting you talk about valuing it as a tribe, because so often Jewish people do that as it is a tribal mentality, or a tribal outcomes of what you're looking for as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take always a linear way of talking about things or dealing with a problem or managing a problem, but it's about the relationships that go on behind, and what happens behind the scenes, often not what happens at the actual meeting.
Yeah.
And I can't sit here and let you talk about your community without talking about an ancestor that Paul and I both share, William Cooper, who was an Aboriginal man who read about Crystal Knot in the Argus. He was living in Footscray, and he got so upset about it, he got a whole lot of blackfellas marched to the German consulate and protested against their treatment of your community over Crystal Knot. And as a result, your community sees him as the first non-Jewish person to stand up against the Nazis. And there's a statue and a tree from a gum tree there with water from the Murray that sustains it. So, I couldn't go on without saying.
That's very nice. That's very lovely of you to mention it, because it is. Our communities from that time, and probably even before that time, were inextricably linked. And since then, of course, there are many members of the Jewish community that have stood up and supported Indigenous rights, and we wouldn't have had a Mabo decision without Ron Caston.
Absolutely.
Who effectively pro bono did ran the Mabo case, and you would have had the whole terra nullius and all of that would not have happened but for a Jewish community that felt very strongly, and Ron Merkel and Alan Goldberg, and these were pillars of the Jewish community who had education. But also they came to the country as refugees.
They could hear it and feel the same story.
And they knew those stories from when they were children and thought, right, well, this is the right thing to do because we were supported and we will give back.
But the Roses and the Harrisons share that common ancestor.
So we've got 10 minutes or so for anybody to ask any questions. I do love how we kind of came around as well, and we do have to kind of...
What, didn't we say something about time though?
No time. No.
Well, we've got 10 minutes. Because we want to have time to have a drink. And,
hang on now. So now we're talking relationship.
The yarning continues outside,
not on the camera.
Not in the not on cameras. So anyone have any questions for Mark or for Rachel? Or observations? Yeah. This is actually okay to have an observation.
Uncle Mark, so for you, time is timeless and it's more about relationship. Now, does that stand for our relationship with the ecology, environment, the places we go, the streams that we touch? So how about the sustainability, environmental sustainability concept in your own way of this timelessness?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a good answer for it, but I'll try anyway. I often get people in a group like this to look at your watch, we're talking about time, and give every minute 1,000 years. And where my plane landed today was within a couple of kilometres of the Killer Man remains being found. That was 8 minutes ago. They give every minute 1,000 years. And Aboriginal people have been here the whole hour. But Plato Socrates was here 1 minute 3 seconds ago. So
wow.
It's when you sit with that dimension and, think about when I worked in Asia teaching MBAs, I remember marking a paper for a Japanese super that was Daimaru that was here. It's got a 200-year business plan. And last week in Uluru with those executives, I go to too many funerals, people trying to fix things in this time. And I talk about the Anishinaabe, a band of Indians between Canada and America on Turtle Island. And they talk about 7 generations because we're sitting here in this generation and we were influenced by 3 generations before us, and we're going to influence 3 generations going forward. And, and time, if you think about it in those concepts, the young kids out of Uluru, I told them that if it got 200 years for us to get to the state we're at the moment, with the gap not even being arrested, let alone closed, it'll take 200 years to fix it. Don't kill yourself trying to do it now, but think about what we want Aboriginal people to be in 200 years and come back and listen to what your ancestors telling you here and now. For me, it's getting kids in the uni and making the university more Indigenous, more humanised through indigeneity, and then do what you need to do on your watch. But no, you're contributing to, I won't be here to, I like to see gaps shut, but, it's, I also, maybe the stroke has put out that part of the brain that she be fed by delusion.
But we are on a continuum, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
We can just do something about the time that we are here to do what we can, while still taking into account the influences that came before us, but then thinking about what we leave behind, whether it's for generations to come. I think that's the continuum we're on. We're only just that period of time, I think.
I have a smartwatch. I rarely use it though.
Gemma.
it's interesting where I think that you both have this duality of perspective that you're constantly.
Oh, you get a microphone.
You both have this duality of perspective that you're always walking through life with, and there's, vast majority of us who are walking through with one perspective and operate in an environment that obviously has this industrial military perspective. And I guess kind of my question is, what do you think we need to unlearn?
It's so hard to unlearn things, isn't it? Isn't that the hardest part?
That's the challenge. And I think to your point about sitting in things, sometimes the sitting in things is perhaps recognizing that something needs to change in a perspective that makes us go, all right, there's perhaps a way and a path to change.
And that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to sit in things because in the organisations that I've always been worked in or been involved in, it's always about, well, what's the answer? What's the solution?
How do we fix it?
How can you fix it? Not how we.
Yeah,
I would be happy if they just said, how can we fix it? But it's really, how can you fix it? And it's not always as straightforward as that. And I've often tried to say to boards, it doesn't always work, but say to boards is, I'll get back to you on that. I need to think about it. I need to sit on that for a while. I need to see where that takes me. Now, I might not have an answer to my boards often are not good at waiting. They don't like waiting. But sometimes that's what you have to do is sit and be quiet. And I trust me, I'm bad at it myself, very bad at being quiet. But I think that's a really tricky, how do you do it?
How do you unlearn?
How do you unlearn things that you've learnt? I don't even think it's a matter of unlearning though. I think it's about recognising what those things are because they're a part of your makeup, they're a part of who you are. I don't think that there's anything wrong with having, all knowledge is important, doesn't matter what that is. All experiences are important. It's what you bring forward and back at any particular time in the situations that you're in. And I think that, so I think I'd question your question about unlearning because I don't think you should unlearn anything. I think you're going to add to the knowledge that you've got if as opposed to deleting something that you've already learned. I see unlearning as that's I would challenge you a bit on that. But
you've been challenged.
You've been challenged. No, yeah. But do you understand what I'm saying? Is that it's not that I think we should. There may be people. It's about seeing the other perspective, not about forgetting what you've learnt. That makes sense.
Maybe it's about learning though in a different way.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I can really relate to a lot of what you've said because I'm a lawyer as well.
Yeah.
So when you ask a lawyer a question, a lawyer understands why we say, well, that depends. Because there's no one clear answer to anything, but it's anything in life as well. And I think it's quite interesting from having gone to university and the way you're taught at university as well, in that you do a law degree or you do anything else and you're doing your assignments and you have to pick a position, really. You have to put your view there and you have to argue that one view. We're not taught and we're not encouraged to do an assignment where you put two views there, that you have a balanced view. And a lot of in law, as you know, turns on facts and evidence. That's what it turns on.
It's interesting because I've started I'm teaching admin law students at Monash Law School at the moment, and they've been taught that very linear way. And I have said to them, I don't care what you are. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm freaking them out last week. No right or wrong answer. Just argue something. Doesn't matter what your conclusion is.
It's like the class that you did with me.
Yeah.
Tell me your workings.
Tell me where you're
how
coming
you got
from.
there.
How you got there.
I'm not interested. There's no answer.
That's and perhaps unlearn is like that in itself is perhaps a challenging word.
Yes.
I think the deprogramming or the change of perspective, because what you're talking about there is
yes. Maybe that's a better word.
Deprogramming from a purely linear right. There is black and white. It's binary to, programming for more expansive ways of thinking and mindset, because I think we are, taught and taught to teach in certain ways, taught to think in certain ways.
Sure.
And I think it's these, learning different, perspectives and culture and history about how things would have shown up differently in different versions of history, and kind of going, isn't there something better or different or more interesting about that? Because how we are today doesn't have to be how we are tomorrow.
100%.
And to kind of build on that, Gemma, Mark, I also think, again, probably we still come back to the concept of time. Like this idea that, but we just got to get it done in 11 weeks if we're teaching, or we've got a plan that we need to get objectives out in 3 weeks' time. How do we make people feel comfortable with pushing back against that?
I like the discussion about unlearning, and I would throw into the mix is colonisation, decolonising yourself. And I'm not saying again, with the binary, people go to land as a colonised, but minds and spirits are colonised, by the industrial classroom. So how can you recognise the paradigms, the boundaries? In my day, when Bob grew up on the missions, every Victorian town has got a boundary road.
Yep.
And Boundary Road was black fellas. The elders talk about how as kids they would dart across boundary roads and come back again and say, well, I beat it. So, but we walk around with boundary roads in our minds. The elephant and the invisible rope was a metaphor they used last week. But where's your boundary road? What are the limits of your paradigms, your sensibilities? And, of course, blackfellas traditionally go to the boundaries to share knowledge. They don't go on your land. The boundaries, Trump wants to put walls up better. And, to us, that's the place where the best knowledge is found at the edge. So
that's where we meet in no man's land.
Yeah. So, the unlearning is probably recognising the boundaries that you have, How I applied it, when I taught in Asia, I was sitting around the pool and all my colleagues were drinking, Singapore sligs to say we love culture. And I was like, oh, God, you haven't seen it yet, Anyway, it hit me that I was an educational colonist, that I was there teaching Western management theories to Chinese. I went in the next day. You Chinese are the best business people in the world. If you can do something a Chinese way through Gongshi or other philosophies, do it. But if you want to know how the West thinks, listen to me. And that paradigm changed around, and that's why I got invited back and had a long career working from Beijing all the way through to Jakarta and Manila, because I didn't go and colonise. So
it's about learning how the other side thinks.
Yeah.
So to negotiate with other people, or to talk, or to come to an agreement with somebody else, you have to understand their way of thinking. And it's about exploring that, isn't it?
We call that here at Deakin cultural intelligence, not cultural competency, cultural intelligence, yeah.
Any further
I know there's a question at the back.
or thoughts?
Question at the back.
Grab a microphone.
Grab a microphone. Come to the front.
Yeah.
If you can find a seat.
Yeah, find a seat right.
Stand, it's okay.
Stand.
Oh, here we go.
Just in terms of what you were saying around Western ideas and constraints and all of that, do you think that is sort of partly responsible for cultures in Australia sort of dying out in a sense? When you think of the Italian culture after World War II in Australia, and now how most Italians generationally don't identify as Italian and rather identify as Australian.
Yeah, we want to identify as Italian, though, even though we're not Italian, right?
Everyone wants to.
Or French, or I don't know.
But I mean, do you find that is responsible for that sort of thinking, that because of this way of growing up in Australia, you have to assimilate rather than embrace your culture?
I think I think I briefly touched on that, about the pulling and pushing of a generation that wants to be accepted, whatever that it means, but also wants to maintain their own uniqueness and culture. Does it happen here? Of course it sort of happens out, but it's...
I mean, one of the things that I would add too is that my mob, the language doesn't exist anymore. I mean, and I think that's, and it was only when you and I went to Melbourne Museum and you walked around, and I just came to this realisation that can you imagine if a group of people came in and said, you can't talk your language anymore at all. You have no way to communicate with each other. And I think saying this to the Italians, because there were 2 Italian students, I said, can you imagine what that would be like if it's not that you don't want to speak your language, it's that you're not allowed to speak your language. And I think, I mean, language is a critical part of culture I think, because it communicates things. So,
Huge.
you know, Kulgoa people are Kulgoa River, or Murawari people are near the Kulgoa River. So river people. So the way that I'm assuming that they talk about things are different. And I think that's the problem with assimilation, is that it doesn't acknowledge even like the smallness of culture that, you know, like even in Italy, it's not really Italy, you know, like it's a group of tribes, really.
Absolutely.
I spend, you know, a lot of my time in Italy, and it feels like that.
Well, I mean, they don't call them states; they call them regions.
Exactly.
Regions.
Exactly.
Spain's the same. I've just been in Spain.
And so I think, again, what we've done is that we've westernized, or not even westernized, what have we done? Colonized, or to make things easier for us. And I think, you know, to get back to this, because we're in an MBA program, is, you know, in a way what we do is that we teach an American version of management, you know, an American pretty much northeast US form of management. And that has, and we don't know if it's good because there's no control group doing something else. So I think this is the thing, is the way we even run business is a form of assimilation. Is that, and there's a philosopher, John Ralston Saul, who kind of said, you know, think about all of the people who run businesses in the world. They've all done an MBA. Here I am talking everybody out of doing an MBA. They've all done an MBA through a model of that kind of Western industrial
lens,
kind of mindset. So how are you ever going to get any difference of thinking? And I think the one thing that, and I don't mean to talk up the MBA, but the one thing I've been trying to do really a lot with this program, and bringing people like Mark and Rachel and others into things like the Big Think, is to say, what if we just listen to different perspectives from every now and then? What if we undid some of those practices? What if we just went, sometimes it's okay to slow down. Sometimes it's okay not to aim for the best result. It's actually the process. It's hard. And I think everything is a form of assimilation or colonization. I think culture is a big one, but also I think language is such a critical part of that.
It's really hard to keep an individual culture and at the same time be accepted in the larger community. It's a huge challenge. And Jewish communities are often, you know, it's like, oh, well, you all live here or you all live there. I mean, don't, but I should. But it's the same thing, because when people migrated, they came and lived with other people that they felt comfortable with. That they live around those people. It's the same. It's tribal. It's back to our tribal discussion again. When
we put walls around, we don't see the richness in each other's culture. When the national curriculum came out over COVID, Sky TV scrutinised all of the people on my advisory council to ACARA. They ran resistance to me. And I beat them on the narrative, and it was mainly Alan. Google Mark Rose and Alan Tudge, and you'll see. He said the Aboriginal stuff will make kids hate Australia, and they won't ever go to war and fight. Well, gee,
God,
when I'm doing a John Lennon, imagine if there was no. Anyway, I grabbed the narrative: is what's the true face of this country? We have a colonial history. It's rich. It should be in the curriculum.
Absolutely.
We are geographically part of Asia and the Pacific. That should be in the curriculum. We engage with the world's most diverse multicultural community. That should be in the curriculum. And we have the world's oldest living continuous culture. If we can't get a great curriculum out of those four faces, let's all homeschool. So, you know, that we have, and that an MBA led by people like Paul will connect you with all those four faces, not the binary, not, very colonizing, as you say, American theory. If you read it, you got the Eastern group, and I've just come back from Harvard doing a course there. Then you got the Bible Belt, you got the West Coast, and then you got European management theory. And at the airport, every book is there to capture your mind and colonize you.
Yep.
But an MBA that gets you to think, gets you to see the forest and the trees. Yeah.
And that's one of the things we were talking about, results in your MBA, and everyone was concerned about how well you do or how not. For me, the MBA was the journey of the learning. It didn't matter what the result was. It would be helpful that I'd pass it, which I did. But you end up doing better than you think if you just live the journey, not the result. I think that's what's important. Anyway.
That's where we'll finish it, I think. Thank you. That was great. There you go, Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Drinks and snackies outside. Thank you to Mark and to Rachel for
pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
The kind of deep conversation that we've had. I wish we could keep going.
We could keep going.
But we might just sit here and keep going. You go and have your drinks.
We'll just keep chatting away.
We'll chat with you.
Go and find your own boundaries out there.
Yeah, go and set your own boundaries.
No, thank you for...
And thank you for everybody coming out on
thank you.
Wednesday night.